I'll pass the floor over to Simon Doran. So Simon's a scientist at the Institute of Cancer Research in London, where he leads efforts in advanced imaging informatics, and he has a focus on the development and customization of XNAT as a platform for the cancer imaging community. So Simon, if you'd like to introduce your talk, and then hopefully we will have a good discussion from there. Thank you.
Sure, I'm going to share my screen here, and hopefully you can see that. Penny, can you confirm that you can see that and hear me? That's good. Well, thank you very much. I'm Simon Doran, and welcome to this session from me as well. So I'm going to give you a brief talk to start with, but by all means, please come in. You can actually, it's a standard Zoom session, so you can just chip in questions as and when. Just enable your microphones. So as you can see from the all the logos at the top here, this is a genuinely multi-institutional effort that we're involved in, sponsored by Cancer Research UK, who fund what's called the National Cancer Imaging Translational Accelerator. A few quick acknowledgements. So the people who work with me and for me on the NCTA repository unit are here, and the sort of home team at the ICR is listed here. So a fabulous bunch of people in both cases. So I've got a subtitle of my talk, which is Back to the Future, and you'll see why that is in just a minute. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about the vision of what an imaging repository and data repository could be about. And I'll talk a little bit about how we are, how one should be accessing fair data, and then end briefly with a quick run through some XNAT capabilities. Just a quick declaration on conflict of interest. I'm in receipt of a sub-award on a US NIH NCI grant to develop XNAT for cancer research. So back to the future, and I just wanted to show you that this whole enterprise has been going on a long time. This is well, it's something I gave in 2008. It's essentially a few slides that were also taken out of my job application for the for the particular post that I'm in all those years ago. And basically, what it was saying was that we have there's a big challenge of data diversity, and there are all these different sorts of things that we might want to store, and PACS doesn't really, standard PACS is not the greatest of tools for a researcher. It doesn't necessarily store all of these things in the way that you would want to, and that was true then, and things have been modified slightly since then, but broadly speaking, it's still true today as well. Now, keep that in mind, and I want to give you another help. Sorry, that yeah, okay, my slides were going a bit wrong there. So what's wrong with the way we do things now? And to a certain extent, there are still labs. This was 2008, and there are still labs that do manage their data in this way. They use file structures on PCs or Linux systems, and there are all sorts of potential data security problems. We have file transfers on insecure portable devices. Who can actually access those data? Well, if you're running a lab where you want common access to some bits of data and restricted access to others, a standard Linux file system is not necessarily the way you want to go. How does this all work with data protection legislation? How is it archived? What happens if somebody accidentally removes data? And we heard a little bit from Nicola a little bit earlier about organizing data by file name. He was talking a little bit about the complexities of organizing quantitative imaging data and derived data and so on in form of nifty files, and talking a little bit about bids. Well, I just want to think about what DICOM files look like. If you just use the labels that come off the scanner, you're apt to get things that look a bit like this. And overall, there are just too many files to keep track of, and that makes it really difficult to audit things. And here was my example of the sort of standard. I'll do a disservice to PhD students everywhere if I say that this is a PhD student way or a postdoc way, or even some of my academic colleagues' ways of organizing things. You know, you have multiple files with different names, you have copies of files, which one was the latest file, and so on, and it can get really quite messy. And then when you're looking at the science you want to do with these results, think about the sorts of things we do. We have, we get some data, we do some fit points, we do some analysis, and get some parameter values out. So what happens if we have one study that might make a difference and we have some concerns about it? Yeah, what happens if we want to query that point? Or what happens if we want to change the analysis method? What happens if we redefine the region of interest or use a different mathematical model? If we've had to go through, and bear in mind this was 2008, sort of writing down results as we go along, doing some processing, and then at the end of the day, collating those results into a spreadsheet or something. If you want to change things drastically or want to redo some analysis, that's a lot of work to redo again. So bear in mind these as problems, and let me think about it. And I'm also going to give you a quote. So this was a very controversial paper when it first came out. There was a misapplied, oh, sorry, that should say software test. I don't know why it says passage. There was a misapplied test in some software. And the implication of it was the author said, these results question the validity of some 40,000 fMRI studies and might have a large impact on the interpretation of neuroimaging results. So it's not feasible to redo all those studies. And they said lamentable archiving and data sharing practices mean that most couldn't be reanalyzed at the end of the day either. So this generated a lot of kerfuffle, and there was, it was actually amended, and but despite that, the overall conclusion was still very sound. Informatics and the sort of thing that we're talking about here really matters. So let's think about two different examples of informatics. So you might think, what's a repository? What's a data repository? Well, is it just the Amazon of you know, the Amazon of imaging, if you like, where you get a list of images, you can put them in your shopping cart and check them out and download them? Or is it a bit like a PACS, where you can do everything on one platform and you never need to download the images or move the images out at all? And I'd say both of these are rather outdated ways of thinking about data and data repositories in the modern era. This is a great solution, but it's not a good model for research. And what we're trying to be in research is be agile and allow end users to do stuff. So here's a little bit about the vision. So XNAT's at the heart of what I do. At the start, it's just a repository for data from typical clinical sources, but there are all sorts in a research context of other data, including genomic data and all these other imaging modalities. And you might process them, you might do things with those data, and then you want to register the results back in your database with some provenance. And finally, you might want your users to interact with these data and to visualize them, and maybe in the cancer case, create some sort of virtual tumor board. So the way we see a repository for multi-center trials is a very joined up sort of endeavor. So it goes all the way from your multiple trial sites, sending you imaging data which go onto the platform. You might do a specific, maybe AI-based reconstruction. You might annotate your data, analyze it. You could take the data off the repository, feed it into a guided biopsy system. You might want to integrate these things with genomics and clinical data and do some sort of prediction, get a decision on an individual patient, and then use all of this to inform some modeling to create some sort of prototype for commercialization, put that through a CE marking process, all of which can be managed via the data repository, and then it becomes a very cyclical and replicable process. So I want to move on briefly to how we might want to use XNAT to access data from clinical studies. And XNAT can find a place in all these different levels. So you can see in this direction, going down back to where the data start out in the hospital system, then you've got lots of private information, and this feeds into the talk that we had on anonymization a little bit earlier. You've got fully identifiable data here, but at the other end of the scale, you might want to create community resources that are completely open access, and they might be for journal submissions or for Kaggle challenges or something like that. And XNAT, so I just show you how in our institution we have a flow of different XNAT systems. This is the Royal Marsden Hospital's identifiable system. It goes into the ICR's anonymized system, and then we can send our data through multiple tiers of XNAT through to open access at the end if we want to. I'll just skip this and move finally to XNAT capabilities. How does the repository make your life easier? Well, it allows you to authenticate your users, allows you to manage your different users, allows you to give access to different users for different trials with different levels of privilege. They can be owners or they could be collaborators. XNAT allows you to upload data with various methods. It allows you to browse imaging sessions. It allows you to browse the sequences within a session. It even allows you in a really small number of clicks to drill down to individual DICOM files and download them. A crucial feature, which is so blindingly obvious that it's surprising PACS doesn't do it, is that you can arrange your data by academic project. Here's a few different projects we've got here, and search for your data. And finally, I'll just show you very quickly the sorts of things you can do when viewing data. So here's some data, and the task that we've got in this little exercise is to do some AI-based segmentation. And what we're going to do is use the NVIDIA Clara platform to do some lung segmentation. So now what's happening is that live, this AI NVIDIA platform is being invoked. So we're using a commercial SDK to run some deep learning. And what this is going to be doing is to automatically annotate the lungs. So what would have taken a clinician, maybe an hour or so to outline is now being done in just 30 seconds or so. And you can see the results here using the XNAT image viewer. And you can see that we've done this very nicely in three dimensions. Right, so that's pretty much it. Just one thing to say on containerization, but I'll come back to that a bit later once we've had a chance for people to ask any questions. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Simon. That's great. Really good overview of what XNAT can do and how it fits in to your institution and more broadly. Can I encourage people to ask questions, put their camera on, or type it in the chat if you prefer? Is there anybody that's got anything that they'd like to ask Simon? No. Well, that's the case, I'll start off, because actually it kind of loops back to a question that somebody asked in the talks earlier, which was really about which platform should we use when there's lots of choice. And I guess I was just wondering your perspective on this. So clearly, you've invested your energies in XNAT, but why XNAT? Why not another platform? And also, how do we go about as a community getting enough people to use a certain repository to make that actually the best thing to do? Which basket should we put our eggs in, I guess?
Well, so I think the first thing to say is there's no one basket, right? It's not going to happen. So one of the things, I was employed, been working at the ICR on an informatics brief since 2006. The NCTA grant that we've currently got is what I'm paid on, and this was an idea that CI UK had, was to link their different imaging centres together and to have a common repository platform. Now, it became quite clear from day one that actually individual institutions wanted the flexibility to be able to put their data or to house their data under their own jurisdiction. So one common platform was never necessarily something that was going to happen. Within the NCTA consortium, we actually have at least established that XNAT is going to be the way we go. We have a lot of separate different XNATs, but we've all chosen XNAT. But that's not going to be the case in different countries around the world, even different places within the UK. So there is going to be no one standardized platform, no one size fits all. But on the other hand, what you need is interoperability, right? So the whole business about FAIR is it's findable. So we have to develop suitable advertising systems for our data. It's got to be accessible. Well, XNAT does excel in making things accessible to the right groups of users. That's a big plus point, and it's really easy to set up. But interoperable is the I word in FAIR, and I think that what we have to do, there are European platforms, so the Horizon 2020 program is developing at least 2 really large cancer imaging platforms, but there are always going to be others. If you move slightly out of the medical field and go to Eurobioimaging, for example, they have their own platforms. If you go a bit further off to genomics, then they have completely different set of platforms. So there isn't going to be no one platform, and it's all about making them interoperable in the right way, I think.
Penny, it's okay if I have a question, or if anyone else wants to come in, please do. So since we've got Nicola here as well, and Simon, obviously with with Flywheel, the acquisition of Radiologics, is a plan, or do you know if the plans to have both of these systems, the XNAT system and Flywheel, sort of coexisting for the foreseeable? It's not like there's a plan to almost merge them, or?
So I don't have any really big inside track on exactly what the plans are, but I strongly suspect that those platforms will stay separate for the it's probably better to ask Nicola about that, but I'm sure they'll stay separate for a little while yet. Although what's happening behind the scenes, so I'm working on particularly on the viewing application, and there will be some coordinated effort on that to make some of the code bases more compatible, and but in terms of the long-term view that the Flywheel board have, I'm afraid I don't have any privileged information there.
And don't either. For sure, I think, like as Simon mentioned, like the current goal is really for making the platform interoperable as much as possible. So there's like for a long time, it's going to be trying to even get a priority, trying to understand like how to consolidate those two different platforms and how to basically leverage this. I think it's really about these ideas that I maybe didn't really pitch very well at the end of my talk about like federative service. So now that you have, different actors which are like sustainable, that are kind of bringing value, and also given the barrier, the barrier entry to, hosting your data on a platform is kind of high. So once you're into XNAT, then it kind of makes sense to keep using XNAT for, you've been putting like money, time, resources, people, you have your habit and so on. So you really want to try to maybe build like something which is sitting on top of those platforms. And as we are moving toward federative learning, like this, where maybe actually there is a less of a need to share the data, but more like sharing the added value that you have in your data by being able to bring the code to the data instead of bringing the data to the code, as one of the speaker was mentioning. I think there is really a need for this maybe additional layer on top of the different platforms that are going to be there and likely going to stay for quite some time.
And how do you envisage that could be coordinated? Have Simon or Nicola got an insight hand to, because I can see how we have these different platforms that will have sustainability. If we want to make things interoperable, how is that conversation happening? Is it happening, and who could manage that?
So I think one of the big things, and it was mentioned in one of our previous talks in the session, is that national funders are going to be the people that drive this. The first thing is that we can develop the technology as much as we like to make data shareable, but at the end of the day, if the PIs and the people who run the study decide that they actually don't want to share their data, then we're going to have a whole load of things in our databases, but nobody's going to be allowed to actually share them. That's problematic. Then it has to go. Then we have the whole issue of what were the ethics under which the data were originally acquired. What was their route into the database, and that's also not a done deal either. So the whole mechanism of how we get our data to be shareable and how we make them findable, that's tricky. But I think it's the big national funders, in my field, the Cancer Research UK's of this world, NCI over in the States. These are the organizations that are going to have to take a big stick to the researchers and say, these data sets were funded by public money. These aren't your private things to exploit. You need to open this up. So I think that particular bit of the effort's got to come from the top.
Yeah, agreed. Has anybody got anything that they would like Simon potentially to show in terms of how XNAT is used? Any specific questions about the platform that Simon could maybe elaborate on? And if not, is there anything, Simon, that you'd like to go into a bit more detail about?
I mean, I could ask. I was going to ask you about if no one else has, Simon, just about. I think maybe you're going to come on to the containers as well. How you develops the container, the scripts, and deploy containers.
So okay, so let me just since I do happen to have here's one I did earlier in terms of the slide. So basically, just for people who don't know what containers are and why they're potentially useful, I want to take you back to why these things are called containers. So think about these boats that you often see, these container ships, right? So these the goods that are transported come in absolutely all shapes and sizes, right? So how is it that we can pack our ships really efficiently? In 100 years ago, things didn't look like this at all. There were these chaps at docksides called stevedores, and they would literally spend days packing the maximum amount of things into boats, and very skillful at fitting things of all shapes and sizes into the hold of a boat. Well, nowadays, the whole throughput of everything is very much quicker, because we can take goods of arbitrary shapes from door to door and pack arbitrary consignments, and this word arbitrary is really important, pack them efficiently, and you can ensure that standardized handling facilities, the ships and lorries that actually take these containers, are available everywhere. So software containers are exactly the same. Oh, spot. I can never spell analogous. Sorry about that. These software containers are a bit the same. You can code your algorithm in any language, and that's essentially the same as saying my goods to travel are a different shape. They don't have a great fit with everything else. So the container provides this sort of packing container where you can code your algorithm however you want, but you can package it with its completed environment in a standard shape. And these container services, this one's called Docker and this one's called Singularity, they sort of represent the sort of standard handling facilities, if you like, at each of these locations. So Docker and Singularity represent sort of crane and the port facilities and the standard lorries that enable you to take your algorithm out of where it's stored, to unpackage it and transport it to wherever you want and allow you to run it. So how does this work in the XNAT context? Well, so the XNAT container service is something that links Docker to the storage within the XNAT application and to the user. So what happens is the user sits at what? Well, let's first say that the system administrator installs Docker. And then they install a whole bunch of different what are called Docker containers, and they're installed within the XNAT container service. Now the end user chooses what data they want and decide what context within XNAT they want to run things in. So do they want to run that container on a single scan, all the scans from subject? Do they want to apply that same thing to all the subjects in their project or database? Do they want to run it automatically or run on some trigger conditions? For example, if I've got a radiomics container, then I might want to run that whenever a user is in the viewer and decides to define a new region of interest. So you can say, as soon as the region of interest is stored, then automatically run that container, and then hey presto, you've generated your radiomics features or whatever. So what can be done is that we can put all those things together, and you can run pretty much any image processing algorithm that you like. So I hope that's a generic answer to your question. I haven't got anything actually prepared to show you doing that in practice at the moment, but actually Penny probably has.
There is actually a poster in the in attendee if anybody wants to look at how you can go about doing this. And I think a question kind of leading from that, Simon, is given this functionality and this move towards using repositories, do you think you then encourage people when developing code to make sure that they have a containerized version of that code available for people to use and to be implemented on platforms such as XNAT?
Yeah, so I think the other thing to say about it is, and this was a question that one of my colleagues had me just the other day. I was saying to him, well, I think this would be a really good study to demonstrate containers, and he was a bit wary. And it was an important point is that the container is not necessarily there to speed up the development process, right? Because there's still a place for just taking all your data, downloading their, XNAT may contain the canonical copy of those data that shouldn't get changed, but there's still a place for downloading all those data and mucking around with them to your heart's content to develop things. What a container is useful for is to say, okay, I've now developed this really nice bit of code. I've demonstrated on my own data that this works generally, it will generalize. Now, once you've got that sort of, in CETA speak, this would be locked down biomarker or locked down process. Once you've got that and you're prepared to share it, then you put it into a container and say, this is now ready. And other people can try that out on their data by just pressing a button, and they don't have to know about the complexities of whatever went on in the development process. So I think that's more where containers, like, for example, nobody would really want to write, if you're in neuroimaging, a skull stripping program from scratch. Okay, if you have to prepare your data, what you want is somebody's standard off the shelf tool to do that particular job. If you want to do a DICOM to NIFTY conversion, there are quite a few complexities in that. So what you might want to do is just press a button and have the fruits of somebody else's effort, right?
Given that, how do you think we should go about managing which tools are actually available? Because when this seems like a very good opportunity to standardize how things are done by having these tools available on platforms such as XNAT. But do you think that there should be an array of tools which community have access to, or do you think the community should decide which tools are available on platforms such as XNAT? You see my...
So that, oh, sorry. I think that the XNAT team did try, and it was a first effort about 5 years ago. They had something called the XNAT Marketplace. So the idea is very much like the Google Play Store or the Apple Store, where you just set up a place where people can upload their tools and do it. Didn't get very much take up. I think we were a bit early in the day. At the moment, things seem to be most easily findable via GitHub and open source stuff. And if people would just put their containers, or they would take their code that's on GitHub, containerize it, then that may be a way forward. But there's still a place for a proper container service. But I mean, a Docker Hub is that, if you know how to look for it, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Anybody got any more questions? I don't keep asking. Has anybody else got anything they'd like to ask Simon?
If no one else is coming in, I mean, please do come in if you want to
don't
ask something. Penny, if you've developed something, what's the best sort of educational resources? I mean, we're looking at developing containers, and obviously there's the XNAT documentation there, but the educational material, or trying to go from having a script to actually something you can deploy as a container, is there any, what do you think the best resources are to look at?
So it is my colleague Mike Burks who was involved in putting the containerizing our MADAM code, which is a DC analysis code, and running that through a container on XNAT. So there's some information in the poster that's in attendee there, and I'm sure Mike would be happy to talk you through it. Mainly he used the documentation from XNAT, but I think it was some trial and error. So it may be that it would be useful for us to have a feedback process by which that standard ability to do that is made as easy as possible for people, because I think that's one of the I don't know, Simon, you might be more familiar with the documentation that XNAT provide, but I think it wasn't all that clear.
I'd say it's getting better. One of the issues about having an academic project, and this is one of the things the NCETA repository unit is in the process of trying to do, is trying to take what's essentially an academic project, even if developed over a long period, and try and turn that into some sort of service and be the organization that actually provides all this documentation for people. It's a really big effort. So I think the XNAT documentation evolves, improves. It's actually moderately comprehensive, but I think the team over in WashU is actually very receptive, and ask questions on the discussion group as well. I think you usually get an answer from the discussion group, and one of the good things is, as the platform becomes more widely used, it starts to be not just the core group in WashU that will answer your question. People chip in from all over the world to contribute answers to questions. So yeah.
And I guess the idea that would be, if you develop a container in XNAT, it should work in Flywheel as well then, I mean, is the overhead of moving a container from one place to another pretty minimal? It's just the configuration within the actual wider platform itself. The actual container wouldn't change. Is that right? Or
Nicola?
I think like so they're all based on container technology. I mean, it's also attractive for BIDS application too. BIDS application are going to run most of the time into Docker containers as well, and Singularity containers. I think we already need, like, it's going back to interoperability. I don't think all of those platforms has some kind of baked in configuration, which are going to interface the container to where's the data, how is the data going to be fed to that container. And those definitions, those specifications are different from the different platforms for BIDS, and the requirements are going to be slightly different. So maybe the next is to build some kind of common, like the same way we've been like building like some common data structure around data specifically for enabling data sharing. I guess there is a need here for standardizing how we're writing containers and packaging codes as well. Yeah.
Most containers should be hold more advanced components.
Sorry, Rowan, we can't quite hear what you're saying. Can you try again?
Oh crap! Oh, sorry. Help! Sorry, did you get some unexpected audio there?
Yeah.
I just clicked on the Chrome tab, and it started playing. Apologies for that.
Oh, sorry. I thought it was.
Sorry, is
right?
this better?
yeah.
Hello. Oh no, it's right. I thought right. Yes, thank you. Ryan Sullivan.
Sorry,
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Laptop was closed, opened it. That may have caused the odd noise. So I was saying, yeah, most containers should be compatible, other than how the data is stored. Some of the more complex ones that are making API calls specific to XNAT and Flywheel would require a bit more work. But I've been told that a compatibility layer is kind of being developed to make that transition between gears and containers a bit easier.
Oh, great. Thank you, Ryan. That's I think it just seemed that this the ability to be interoperable is the thing that we really need to make sure happens as a community, to make sure we're supporting all these different platforms and the move towards using these facilities for data sharing. I note that we are coming to the end of our session here, so I'm going to put just one call out in case there's any other questions that anybody has of Simon. This is your last chance, but I would encourage people to try and find each other on the attendee platform whenever possible, and send messages. I'm sure Simon would be happy to be contacted if you've got any specific questions. But before we go, I'll just pass over to Simon and see if there's anything he'd like to say at the end of the session, just to sum up.
No, I'm very happy. Thank you very much all for coming, and I hope what we said today has given you a little taste, at least, of what XNAT is, what it does, and how we can use it to sort of better the research that we do. So it's all about making our research higher quality, better, more repeatable, and make our results more widely applicable. So thanks very much for listening, and please do contact me if you need any other details.
Brilliant. Thank you, Simon. Thank you, everybody, for coming along. It's lovely to see you all.
Okay. Thanks very much. Okay, bye.